When we think of the Pacific Ocean and of Polynesia in general, most of us will think of some isolated islands, of some beautiful islands, of some lagunas, of some Polynesian people happy to dance, happy to enjoy the fantastic environment in which they are living. We think of surfing, we think also of different elements which in general are very enjoyable and fun. But rarely we think of what Polynesia looked like hundreds or even thousands years ago. Today a game in which we can incarnate a leader of one of the tribes living in that period in the Pacific Ocean, trying to explore the ocean, find new islands, and to build the biggest empire that the whole Pacific Ocean has ever seen. Hello everyone, this is Michel Leviathan Sorbet and this is a new episode of Wojennik TV. Today I'd like to invite you to a trip to the Pacific Ocean because I would like to present one of my favorite non-war games, a game which I enjoyed from the moment I bought it, a game which is in my collection now more than 10 years. This will be the review of Conquest of Paradise. Now, when we hear the title Conquest of Paradise, most of us think of America, think of the discovery of America by Christopher Columbus, or rather of the rediscovery of the American continent by Europeans, and of the famous movie starring Sigourney Weaver and Gérard Depardieu, which was called Conquest of Paradise. But Conquest of Paradise as a game is set in a very different part of our planet, in the Pacific Ocean. This is a game released initially in 2007 by GMT Games and designed by Kevin McPartland. There were two editions of this game. The first one was released in 2007, the second one a few years ago, which was the deluxe edition, in which we had several components upgraded, including, for instance, the villages, which in the first edition are presented in the form of counters. In the second one, we had miniatures, we had different colors, we had new cards added, and what is I believe the most important addition was also the addition of a solo mode, because the initial edition didn't have such a mode. Even so, during this video, I will be presenting the first edition because I'm fond of it, I still own it, and I decided to keep it. Even though I would love to get also the second edition, I am still in love with the first one, and because of some sentiments, because of some emotional aspects, I decided to stick to the original one. The game, as I said a few moments ago, was released initially as a game from 2 to 4 players. With the deluxe edition you can play it also solo. One game should take you somewhere around 90 minutes and the minimum age of the player was rated as 12 or higher. During the game, we will take control of one of the tribes, or one of the Polynesian tribes, and our objective will be to build the most prestigious, the biggest, the most valuable empire in the whole Pacific. We will be exploring the ocean, trying to find new islands, new atolls. We will be sending new colonies on those islands. We will be recruiting new warbands. We will be constructing canoes, both transport ones as well as war canoes. We will be using those troops in order to invade enemy islands. We will develop our empire, building new villages, buying new culture cards. So in general, this is a 4X game in which all those elements are well linked one to another. During this video, I'd like to show you how the first edition of Conquest of Paradise looks, then how it works, and finally I'd like to give you my final thoughts and a brief summary during which I'd like to tell you why I so enjoy this game and why I rated it so highly when presenting you my favorite non-war games ever released. So without further ado, let's take a look at how the first edition of Conquest of Paradise looks. Here is a very brief look at Conquest of Paradise. Now, firstly, I'd like to once more underline that this is the first edition of the game released in 2007. This is the game that I still have in my collection, and although I really would like to own the second edition, the deluxe edition, I'm so fond of this old edition, I'm so sentimental that I decided to keep it and to stick to this edition. Now, in the second edition, you receive different components, you have upgraded components, you have a sturdy map board, you have counters replaced by miniatures, you have different colors used for the counters, you have a solo mode, so a lot of additions, but still I stick to the old one. So during this video I will be presenting you the old edition and I will be showing you how this edition looked. In terms of the gameplay, there are no differences between the first and the second edition, apart from a new deck of cards, which I also own, because this is a deck of cards added to the base game, adding some additional cards, which can be used when playing this title. Now, Conquest of Paradise is a game which transports us to the Pacific Ocean, to Polynesia, 500 AD. So it is in a period very unfamiliar to most of us Europeans who do not know a lot about the history of Polynesia. I really enjoyed the read of the additional booklet added to the game, because in the game we receive two booklets. The first one are the rules, but the second one are the designer notes. And in this document we receive a lot of information about all the islands, about all the explorers which are depicted in the game. This is a terrific read, a terrific edition. I really enjoyed it. I think that this is how war games should be done. Not only by presenting the components, by giving you a lot of fun elements with which you can recreate history or play or just have fun, you also receive components, elements which can teach you a lot of things. And having read this booklet several times, now I feel that I know a lot more about Polynesia than I used to know before. The objective of the game in Conquest of Paradise is to accumulate a specific number of victory points. Those victory points will be tracked on a victory point track on the southern part or of the bottom part of the board. The number of points required to win depends on the number of players taking part in the game. In a 2-players game, you have to accumulate 22 points. In a 25-players game, you have to have 25 points. In a 2-players game, you have to reach 28 points. Those points are granted for several things. But before I describe how those points are counted, let's take a brief look at the other elements which are located on the board. Now, I said that the board depicts Polynesia, depicts the Pacific Ocean. The majority of this playing area, which is composed of hexes, is playable. Each hex with a small square inside is playable, and those are the places where new islands can be found. Because the fun part of Conquest of Paradise is the fact that each time and each game you will receive a very different board. This is a modular board on which we will be placing additional tiles. Those tiles will be randomly drawn, and from those tiles we'll be constructing the entire board. As you can see, we can find, for instance, Tubuai, the Austral Islands. We can find Rawaki, the Phoenix Islands. We can find Hawaii. And the fun fact is that while exploring, it can happen that we will discover the very specific island on the same space as it actually exists. But at most times we will be discovering those tiles in very different locations, which means that in the game, for instance, Hawaii can be located to the south, somewhere near Tonga. It doesn't have to be exactly there where it is historically. And I like this approach. Even though the final board doesn't resemble how Polynesia looks today, it is in some way a thing which
makes the game more interesting. It is additionally more climatic, and it is much more precise in terms of giving you a simulation experience of how explorers in the year 500 AD felt like, because starting their exploration from a given point in a direction unknown to their predecessors meant that they could run into an island, but they could also run into just open ocean. They didn't know where they were heading. This board has also some other places. On the western part, we have Australia, which is not a playable area, but which is somewhat a boundary of the playing area. We have also some islands from nowadays Eastern Solomon's Islands, which are already present on the board. They are printed and they are used in each game. Those islands can be also attacked by players and we can take control of them, although their position on the board will never change. We have also on the western part of the board the Americas, which we cannot reach, or rather we cannot colonize, but we can go to them in order to bring something extremely precious. This something is called the kumara, the sweet potatoes, which taken from the Americas and brought back home can grant you additional victory points. But before I explain how victory points are calculated, I should also explain what pieces each player will be using during their play. Each player starts with their own home island, and we have 4 home islands. We have Tonga and Samoa, which are already printed on the board. If we are playing with more than 2 players, we will be using also the 2 other starting islands, which will be Raiatea and which will be Hiva. So those 4 islands can be used during the gameplay. But if we play a 2 players game, we will be using always Samoa and Tonga. Tonga, as you can see, has a weaker starting position because it has less depth in terms of places which it can explore. Samoa has more place. So you might ask how this influences game balance. I'll respond very easily. Tonga has much more less possibilities of exploration, but at the same time it wins all ties. So if we compare the number of points, and Tonga has the smallest amount of points as well as Samoa, it will be Tonga who will be making all the decisions. So each player starts with their home island, where each player places firstly 1 village in the color that they choose of their choosing, and 1 standard village. So each player will start with 2 villages. Apart from that, each player will start the game with 2 war bands. Those are units which are combat units, which will be placed on our home island from the game's start, but they will be placed at most times face down, because most units will be placed onto the board face down, which is a mechanic which will enable the existence of fog of war during the game. Each player, apart from those elements, receives also a set of counters in their own color. They receive a victory point marker, they receive discovered markers, their own explorer, who will be used during exploration, then canoes of 2 types, transportation canoes and war canoes. The first one will be used at most times to transport over units, but also to create transportation chains of transport canoes, which will influence several game mechanics. We receive also colonies, which are used when colonizing new islands, because while discovering a new island, we have to send a colony in order to create the first village on such an island. Then the war bands, and also 2 rumor tokens, which will be used in order to bluff, or in order to make your opponent wonder what type of unit is hidden underneath in a given location. During the game, we will be using those elements in order to move, in order to construct new villages, in order to discover new islands. So how a turn of Conquest of Paradise looks. The first phase, played during each turn, is the turn order step. Consulting the victory point track, we find the player who has the smallest number of points. In case of a tie, Tonga wins all ties, and this player decides which player will start the next turn and in which order we will be playing this turn. So this is an advantage which the player who is back in terms of points can benefit. After this decision is taken, we pass to the exploration step, which is, in my opinion, the heart of the game and the most entertaining, most interesting element of the entire game. During this step, each player can use his explorer and he can explore the ocean. He can try to find new islands and, in general, explore the ocean around his islands. Starting from a known area, known areas are those which are already placed onto the board in form of printed tiles or of tiles placed or onto the board, or maybe counters of ocean. We can place our explorer onto an unknown hex. After doing so, we will randomly draw one discovery token from the pool. And here we have three possible outcomes. We can find an off-course counter, which means that one of our opponents will displace our explorer to another unknown hex next to the one where we tried to explore. The second outcome is open ocean, which means that we found only water. Such a counter will be placed into the middle of such a hex, indicating that we do know this hex. It is not an unknown hex anymore, but it is empty. There is nothing apart from water. The final, most entertaining outcome is, of course, an island, which means that on the hex where we explored, we found some land. In order to see what type of land it is, we once more randomly draw one of the hex tiles, and without showing it to our opponent, we can take a look at it. And here we have two options. We can firstly place this hex, immediately revealing it to our opponents so that everyone knows what it is, but we can also keep it secret and place on it one of our discovered tokens, which means that we already know what it is, but no other player knows. We have three such counters, so if we have more than 3 tiles, we do have to uncover one of them, showing it to our opponents. And from that moment, this becomes a tile known to all other players. Now, those islands can have a different number of village spaces. They can have from 0 to 4 village spaces. The smallest islands are atolls, on which, as you can see, you cannot build anything, but still they can give you some points under certain conditions. The other ones, which have from 1 to 4 spaces, can be used in order to create new villages, just as you create villages on your home island. After exploring, we can continue to explore, sending our explorer to another hex. But you have to keep in mind that each explored hex has a certain number of knots on it back. As long as you do not have more than 5 knots, everything's fine. But as soon as you reach 5 knots, you have to return home. You cannot continue exploring. If you have more than 5 knots, so 6 or more, your explorer becomes lost. It is placed in a specific box placed on the board, existing on the board, and you lose it for an entire turn. So during the next exploration step, the only thing that happens is the recovery of your explorer. You won't be able to explore anything. You have to wait until the next turn. After exploration, we pass to another step, which is the movement step. And here we have 3 sub-steps. Firstly, we have the pre-move phase, then we have firstly we have the transit phase, then the movement phase, and at the end of this step we resolve all battles. Now firstly we have the transit step, and in order to explain how transit works, this is the moment when I should explain how transport canoes can be used. Now transport canoes can be used in order to create chains of transport canoes. This is something which will give you several benefits. As long as you have a connection of transport canoes linked from one space to your home island, you have additional benefits. The first one is the possibility of using transit, which means that at the beginning of the movement and battle step, you can freely, without spending any movement points, move through this chain any number of units. Units which normally cannot move without using a canoe, or which, for instance, when it is a war canoe, should use movement points in order to move. But using a chain of canoes means that you can move them without spending any movement points, and you can finish movement at any given destination inside this chain. The second benefit of having such a connection is having the opportunity to spend build points in your entire kingdom, in your entire empire. So I will skip for a moment the movement phase because I want to explain at one point what are the benefits of the transportation canoes, and then I will return to the movement step. The second benefit, as I said earlier, is related to building. Building things inside your empire requires building points, and those building points are granted by villages. The rule is simple: each village is one building point, and the sum of those points is the sum which you can spend during the build phase in order to buy different things. For instance, a transport canoe costs you 1 build point, a colony costs 2 build points, etc. And those build points can be used in order to place new units or to buy arts and culture card, which are an additional element of the game, because you can also buy special cards which can grant you points but also special capacities. And units bought are placed always onto a controlled island when you have some villages. But this rule changes in some way if you do not have a chain of canoes. If you do not have such a chain, you still have the same number of build points, but you can spend them only in such a way that all islands which are connected one to another can accumulate their build points in order to place units onto those connected islands. But each island which is separated or which is not part of a connected chain of canoes can use build points only inside its own island. So for instance, in this example, we would get 3 build points, but only 2 could be spent to place units on Tonga, only 1 could be spent to place something on Rarotonga. We cannot accumulate those points into, for instance, 3 build points which would enable us to build a war canoe placed on Tonga. As soon as the chain is established, we can freely use those build points in order to place units where we want inside the chain. Finally, the third benefit of having such a connection is related to victory points. Victory points in general are granted for each village that you have, for each controlled island which is connected to your home island, and for each atoll, half of a point, which is connected to your home island. So again, if an island is not connected to your home island, thanks to the transport canoes, you gain only a 1 point for the village. As soon as you establish such a chain, you also get 1 point for the island itself. And in this example, also half a point for the atoll, which would be connected to your home island. So as you can see, having a chain of transport canoes has extremely important benefits, implies extremely important benefits, and is something which you should really take care of. Now, returning to the movement step, first you can use the transit move, then you can move all the units which have a certain movement factor through known hexes, and if you end the movement on an enemy square, this will trigger a battle during the final phase of this step. Battles in Conquest of Paradise are resolved using a die, and they are resolved in such a way that all war pieces which are distinguished by the presence of a star are placed onto the first row of the battlefield. The the over units are placed into the second row, and the battle is resolved rolling a die. Each time we roll a die, the attacker will roll a die, we consult the battle results, and as you can see, for instance, a result of 3 causes a unit to panic. Such a unit has to retreat to its second row. If a unit is removed, it is permanently eliminated. You cannot use it anymore. A battle is finished when one of the players has no units left in his first row. If it is the attacker, he has to retreat to the place from which he attacked. If it is the defender, he has to retreat to another of his islands, and the attacker takes control of the attacked island. He can sacrifice some of his units in order to preserve the villages present on the island, or he can decide to raise everything and the island remains empty. After resolving each battle, we have the building step, during which we can build different new units, during which we can also accumulate arts and culture cards, and during which we can also create new villages. Now, villages are the key and the most important element of your economical machinery. Each turn you can create only one village on each island, so you cannot, for instance, place 3 islands during one turn on one island. In addition, when you want to create the first village on a new island, you have to bring a colony to this island. So you have to bring it using a transport canoe, and only at that point, at the end of this step, you can replace such a colony by a new village. Some spaces are brown ones, which means that before placing a village, you have to improve their agriculture, spending additional building points. Atolls cannot have any villages placed on them. After the building step, we pass to the very short victory step, during which we calculate the number of victory points. Those are granted for the number of villages that you control, the number of islands connected to your home island, including your home island, which gives you 1 point. For the number of atolls, each atoll is half a point. For having the Kumara counter, which you managed to bring from the Americas. For each arts and culture card, if they happen to give you points, those cards sometimes are worth 0 points, but they give you a bonus. Sometimes they are worth 1, 2, 3, or even 3 victory points at most. Then we move the points counter of each player on the victory point track, and we see if any player managed to obtain the number of points required to win the game. If not, we start a new turn using the same structure that I explained earlier. Now, there are some additional rules. We have some optional rules consisting, for instance, of using the New Zealand tiles, or consisting of rolling the dice for malaria. We have also other very specific rules concerning, for instance, exploring already explored hexes, etc. But I do not want now to spend more time on explaining how Conquest of Paradise works. Rather than that, I'd like to invite you to the final part of this video, during which I'd like to share with you my thoughts about this game after more than 10 years of playing this game. And I'd like also to explain why I think this is why I like this game so much, because I won't be saying this is one of the best games ever released. It's one of my favorite games, so I will try to give you more details about why I love this game, why I enjoy it so much.
The review of Conquest of Paradise appears on my channel surprisingly late. Surprisingly, because it is one of my favorite board games ever released, and after 5 years of running this channel, I finally decided to release a video about it. The reason why I waited for so long is the fact that I am fully aware of the fact that Conquest of Paradise is a game which has some significant flaws. Additionally, this is a game which has its deluxe edition, which is significantly better from the first one. But still, the game is one of my favorites. But still, I do own the first edition and I really enjoy it. So I was very anxious to prepare such a review, but at the same time, I was asking myself a question: how to sell you this game, how to tell you why I still love this game, even though I know that it has some very weak points. But first things first. At first, I'd like to tell you what I really like and what I really love in Conquest of Paradise, but then obviously I will also tell you what I think are the weakest points of this title, trying to be as objective as I can. Firstly, what I like in Conquest of Paradise. I really love the setting. I enjoy the fact, I like the idea of showcasing the whole Pacific Ocean in this game. I like the fact that this is a game which is set in a part of the world in which very few games are set. Sure, we have some games which are set in Polynesia, but we do have not a lot of them. And even when we try to search for when we look at the broader picture, when we try to search for games which are covering the entire Pacific Ocean space, we really have a few of them. Conquest of Paradise is a game which enables us to create an empire in the whole Pacific Ocean, which is quite unique in terms of board gaming. I really like the fact also that the game is extremely climatic. Kevin McPartland and the whole design and the whole development team made a terrific job, not only serving us a game about Polynesia, but also telling us the story of Polynesia. In the first edition and in the second one, obviously also, we receive not only a booklet telling us how to play Conquest of Paradise, we receive also a separate booklet in which we can read about Polynesia. We can read about all the islands depicted in the game. We can read about the explorers, about how the history of Polynesia looked like. So we have a lot of history behind this game. We have a lot of educational value in this title. I personally didn't know a lot about Polynesia before trying this game, but after reading it, after reading all the story, all the background, I really loved the whole thing. I loved the fact that you can play a game and learn such a lot of things about such an interesting part of our globe. Additionally, the mechanics used in the game are very well linked to the theme. So the explorer can get lost. The explorer can find an island, he can find an atoll, he can find only sea. This is extremely climatic, this is extremely historical, because when trying to explore the ocean, explorers absolutely had no clue. They didn't know what to expect, and they could possibly run into a big island, but they could also sail into one direction during several weeks and find only water. This is absolutely historical. The arts and culture card, extremely important addition to the game, not only enabling you to make some twists to receive some advantages in some elements over your opponent, they are also an element, an educational element, which showcases some of the top cultural achievements of Polynesian people. So we have the Mawai, we have surfing, we have hula dance, etc. All those things which make Polynesia so exceptional. What I really like in this game is the fact that this is a very entertaining 4X game. We have everything that we want to receive in a 4X game inside this title. And if I were to rate all those X's which are part of the 4X system, I'd say that exploration is absolutely king in this game. This is, I think, the game using the 4X mechanism in which exploration I like the most. It's absolutely breathtaking. It's absolutely so intense when you explore the ocean and try to find new islands. I love this moment of the game. I love this part of each turn, and I love also the decision which the decisions that it implies. You can sometimes push your luck and try to explore further, but at the same time risking that your explorer will get lost. Sometimes you can play safe, but at the same time, maybe you will not find an island somewhere far to the horizon, which will prove to be an important one, which could be colonized and then which could be linked to your empire. So you have a lot of decisions concerning exploration, when to explore, where to explore, what tiles to show to your opponent, which keep face down, when to risk and to try to find an island at all price. So this aspect, linked with the fact that each board will look differently each time, makes this so special. And this brings us to another point, which is replay value. Conquest of Paradise has an extremely high replay value due to two elements. The first one is exploration. As I explained a few moments ago, each board at the end of the game will look very differently from what you got last time, or even during each of your previous plays. I think that it was a very good idea not to stick to the original places where the islands are set and where they exist in our physical world, and to enable players to find them elsewhere. Because when exploring the ocean, as said a few moments ago, an explorer couldn't expect to see an island specifically where it exists nowadays. He didn't know that such an island existed there. So giving the opportunity to players to discover something in a very different place than it originally exists is a good decision, which also makes the whole Polynesia, the whole Pacific Ocean, very different from what we know today. But this is fine. This is okay. This gives also the game a lot of depth. This gives also the game a lot of replay value. The second aspect, increasing replay value, is the fact that there is no winning strategy in the game. You can win games being very aggressive, building your troops, invade enemy islands, take control of their land, destroy their forces, steal their potatoes that they bring from the Americas. But you can also win a game building a very efficient economical model. You can create an empire without attacking anyone, which will lead to your victory. Because if you're lucky or efficient during exploration and you can link your islands, you can construct a nice island chain, you can build a lot of arts and culture cards, you can win without even fighting any single battle. Each time the winning strategy will be different, because the most important thing in Conquest of Paradise is your ability to adapt to what you found during exploration and what your opponent is doing. If you are unable to adapt, you'll certainly lose. Sometimes you have to be aggressive. If you do not have the sufficient number of villages to being economically capable of winning, you have to switch to military, to your military forces. You have to be more aggressive. On the other hand, if you are lucky during exploration, you have a lot of economical potential, you can try to build an economical engine to secure your borders, but to invest in creating your villages, building arts and culture cards, and winning in this manner without fighting a single battle. So it all depends on what you find and what your opponents are doing. You cannot play a game deciding that you will only, for instance, build villages on developed islands, because then the situation can very drastically change. And depending also on the battles fought, on the ways how your opponents maneuver the forces, by sometimes, for instance, isolating your islands, breaking your island chain, can totally change the outcome of a game. Finally, what I really like in the game is the climate, is its theme, is the fact that when you play this game, each time you have a lot of interesting moments. Exploration is king, but then you have other elements which also make this game so unique. So, building your villages, sending your colonists, using all the optional rules such as the kumaras, so the potatoes which you can bring from the Americas, all the additional islands which are already printed on the board which you can invade, turning inward. So you have a lot of optional rules which can even more increase your feeling of the game, and they can increase the satisfaction of playing the game, make it also so diverse, and increase even more its replay value. Having said all that, there are unfortunately some major flaws to this design which can make this game less attractive than I have tried to sell it to you during the several minutes before. Firstly, one thing which is a major flaw, which might detract some of you, is its randomness. Because unfortunately, Conquest of Paradise is quite a random game, and this randomness comes in several layers. Firstly, exploration. I love exploration in this game. I believe it's one of the most interesting, most satisfying moments of the entire game, but at the same time, it can be also the most frustrating part of the game. Because when exploring, you have absolutely no control over what you will find. And this is historically accurate. This is something which should work as it is in the game. But still, it is something extremely frustrating because it happens sometimes that your opponent is finding an island after an island. He has, for instance, 6 or 7 islands connected, and no, they are not atolls. They are 3 or 2 spots islands, or even New Zealand, which will grant him another tile, which give him such a huge potential, such a huge edge over you, that it will be extremely difficult to return to the game and to be a match to your opponent. On the other hand, you explore only water or you find atolls. It's impossible to develop your empire if you have a bad streak. So this randomness in exploration makes the potentials of players very different. Sometimes those potentials will be very close and games will be very close, but at other times one of the players will just be very lucky, the other one very unlucky, and believe me, the game will very quickly be extremely unbalanced. Of course, if you are very unlucky during exploration, you should very quickly switch to the military strategy. You should build forces, try to invade islands discovered by your opponent, try to dislodge him from his islands, trying to also disrupt his production cycle. This is feasible, but not always will be possible. Secondly, the randomness comes also appears during battles, because they are resolved using the dice, using the die. You will roll the die and you will see the result. You can influence sometimes the outcome of the battle using arts and culture cards, but at most times you won't be able to use them, or maybe you do not have any yet. And only die rolls will determine the outcome of the battle. Now, I have seen epic battles in which we had 12 units opposed to 10 or even bigger ones, which were determined in the end by a single die roll. And of course, we can say, okay, this is quite climatic. We had 2 big war bands fighting on a beach on one of the islands set in Polynesia. And in the end, it was the strongest one, the only remaining tribe member who made the final blow. Okay, that's quite climatic, but sometimes those battles will be extremely unbalanced and due to the die rolls. I have seen battles in which invading forces consisting of 8 troops were repulsed by 2 troops defending an isolated island. I have seen battles in which we had incredible comebacks when a player with only 1 troop left managed to score 5 hits in a row. So it all happens, and it can happen. And again, as it was the case with exploration, sometimes it's just extremely frustrating. Of course, we can say this is again a historical simulation. This can be historically adequate. Not always very big troops manage to win against smaller troops. Sure, but if this thing happens 5 times in a row, it can become frustrating. The last thing which should be also underlined is the fact that the game can also be problematic when you think of the fog of war element. Because although I find that the fog of war aspect of the game is great, you should use it, it really makes the game more fun, it also gives you the possibility of cheating, and not only cheating on purpose. You can cheat without even knowing, because for instance you can make an error while calculating your production points. You can, for instance, make a mistake and place one one troop more. In games in which the production is visible, clearly visible, you spend your production points and your opponent knows what you are placing, you can control what he's doing. And sometimes he will make mistakes because he made an error. Sometimes you can be opposed to a cheater. Of course, we could say you shouldn't play with someone who can cheat, and I'm totally okay with it. I agree with it. I wouldn't like to play with someone who was caught cheating. But the game is designed in such a way that you can cheat involuntarily. This is not your fault. You just made a mistake, and it is impossible to see that you made it. Sometimes only when the game ends, we can have, for instance, doubts. How could you spend all those resource points both on placing units and on placing villages? If you are using the additional sheets in which you can track your income, track your expenditures, it's possible to track it and to see where the mistake was made. But to be frank, who wants to use those sheets? You're not playing in a tournament, you're playing for fun. And although I used those sheets 1 or 2 times when introducing new players to the game, I very quickly dropped them and I'm not using them anymore. I'm just having fun with the game. I do not want to do any additional bookkeeping which is problematic in some games. And Conquest of Paradise works fine if you know the rules, if you know the mechanics, if you can correctly count, and if you double check that you have spent all the production points that you really had on things that you can really buy. If you're sticking to that, this shouldn't be a problem. Otherwise, it can be problematic, especially if the game is a very close one, because in the end it might be the situation that someone won making a mistake in the process of buying a unit 5 turns ago. Okay, that's not a really big problem, because as I said earlier, it's not tournament play, it's playing for fun, but still it can make you feel uncomfortable, especially if you made the mistake involuntarily. This was not your fault, but there was no one to verify, to double check that you played correctly. So it might be sometimes a problem. Having said all that, Conquest of Paradise is one of my favorite board games ever released and ever played. I enjoy each and every play of it. I love the theme, I love the idea, I love the board which we can admire after completing a whole game. I think it's the game with the most interesting exploration system ever introduced. I like the game because it is so unique in terms of its theme and in terms of its quite well polished mechanics. It's still a quite random game. It's a game which uses mechanics which can make you cheat even involuntarily, but still it is such an entertaining and such an original design that I would highly recommend you to try it. Obviously, I do not recommend to buy the first edition, even though I'm very fond of it. You should try the new deluxe edition, in which you will receive better colors of the pieces, in which you will receive the solo mode, in which you will receive the additional cards which weren't part of the first edition. If you're interested in a game set in Polynesia, or if you're interested in an original 4X game, Conquest of Paradise might be an excellent choice. This was the review of Conquest of Paradise, released by GMT Games. Thank you a lot for watching this video. I invite you also to take a look at my other videos on Wojennik TV. Take also a look at my Facebook and Instagram accounts. Have a great day and see you next time.